Chapter 1. She was dead. The world was in flames. Voldemort sat on the Queen's throne in Westminster Abbey. Hogwarts was rubble. Diagon Alley was a collection point for Muggleborns to be shipped to concentration camps. Continental Europe was on the verge of collapsing as the magical and mundane armies of Emperor Voldemort savaged those who stood against them. The Americans, Australians, and the Brazilians had warded their continents. No one could come in. It didn't matter. She was dead. Harry Potter, last surviving member of the Order of the Phoenix, lay in a ditch in western Cornwall, a gentle rain soaking him. He was cuddling the corpse of his wife. Hermione Potter had died not even 5 minutes ago. Please, God, don't let her be dead. I need her. Please, I'll do anything. Please, God, don't let her be dead. They had taken to stealing food from abandoned markets. The canned goods lasted nigh on forever, and, with a quick twist of the can opener, Viola, a main course of Vienna sausages complemented by mandarin oranges and French-cut green beans. They'd had that meal on their wedding night. Please, God, don't let her be dead. It all went to shit after Sirius died. Dumbledore had been poisoned in the Great Hall the next day. Harry was still reeling from the dual impact of Sirius' death and the disclosure of the prophecy, so the twitching, foaming corpse of the headmaster didn't make the impression on him that he thought it would. Hermione came to him that night in bed. Harry looked around wildly as his curtains silently opened. What the? Harry, it's just me. Budge over, we need to talk. As he scooted over, she gingerly climbed in bed with him. Apparently, her wounds from the previous day were not as healed as Madame Pomfrey had declared. A few spells later, they were able to speak in privacy. I think we should leave school tonight, she began. When Harry's eyebrows almost reached his hairline, she waved him off and continued. With Dumbledore dead, Voldemort will probably be here tomorrow. No one can stop him now. He'll come for you. After he kills you, he'll kill all the Muggleborns. She paused and let that sink in. Watching his eyes focus on the canopy of his four-poster, she saw him make his decision and sighed in relief. Okay, where do we go? In the end, they had decided to leave Ron behind. They regretted the error for the rest of their lives. For years later, they'd found a picture of him, or rather what was left of him. He had been drawn and quartered on his beloved Quidditch pitch. Voldemort had indeed come the next day, and his wrath was great. Their broom ride had ended at her parents' home. They later thanked God many times that Stephen and Alice had listened to them and fled the country. Today they were safe in St. Louis. Even Americans need dentists. After a stop at Gringotts, the duo walked out with over £1 million in cash and 10,000 galleons. Hermione made 2 purchases, a library trunk, and a copy of every book in Flourish and Blot's inventory. Harry made 3 purchases, an invisibility cloak for Hermione, a firebolt for her, and a written copy of a charm that would remove the infamous trace from their wands. The charm had been the most expensive. They went to Cardiff and rented a flat, theorizing that going Muggle would protect and hide them, not raising wards in order to avoid attracting attention. They set up their cover as a young married couple. They studied, laughed, and cried. Reading the papers, they could interpret the magical events in the mundane news. Mass murders were taking place. The werewolves and vampires were on a rampage. Giants and dragons were attacking with impunity. Times were becoming tough. Rationing was put in place. Petrol, food, and clothes were all limited in availability. The economy fell like a stone, and a full-scale depression hit Britain. Lines began to form outside employment offices. The magical ministry had fallen first. They found out later that fudge had lasted a mere week and a half after Hogwarts fell. The mundane government lasted 3 more years. Unprepared for the insidious attack via Imperius, midnight assassination, and blackmail, Voldemort strode into the Houses of Parliament in early 1999. Their studying had been fast-paced. Not needing to slow their education for the lowest common denominator, Hermione taught Harry, and, where possible, Harry taught Hermione. Their studying far exceeded the standard Hogwarts curriculum. Harry had taken the lead on their combat training. Power spells, creative transfiguration, offensive wards, and battlefield healing were all covered in detail. When Hermione had asked Harry why they were having their intensive training, Harry had replied, "I've got to kill him." They were fortunate that she was able to learn on her own from books. Toward the end of their time in Cardiff, two things happened that changed everything for them. First, Harry passed his practice newts for defense, transfiguration, charms, runes, arithmancy, and even potions. He'd given her quite a hard time for having the practice tests for a seventh-year exam during their fifth year. The second happening was far more important. He kissed her, and she kissed him back. They made love that night and didn't leave the bedroom for an entire day. Their time in Cardiff had lasted 3 years. During that time, they exchanged letters with their parents. In each one, Stephen and Alice had begged the teens to come to America. They wanted to go. They talked about it time and again, but something neither could identify tethered them to Britain. They couldn't leave. "We still don't know what the power the Dark Lord knows not is." Harry had raged one night. Having worked their way through a bottle of wine, they were half-pissed and both were venting their frustrations. "You feel obligated to do something because of this prophecy." Nodding at her observation, he responded, "Yeah, I do." Taking him in her arms, she gave him a hug. "Let's go see if Grimmauld Place is still the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix." It was, or rather, it was the headquarters of Minerva McGonagall, Phileas Flitwick, Alastor Moody, and Arthur Weasley. They were all that was left. The reunion was subdued. Arthur enveloped them both in a long hug. His entire family was dead, and he was a changed man because of it. Minerva, too, hugged them while Phileas just watched them with a 1,000-yard stare. Harry gave his former Transfiguration teacher a questioning look. "Phileas has killed so many," Minerva whispered. Moody grunted as he took a swig from his flask. Nothing really changed there. The group of 6 began to conduct raids on Death Eater supply depots. Potion supplies, body armor, food, medicines, and clothing were all taken. They knew they weren't really making a dent in Voldemort's activities, but they needed what was stolen. For the first time in years, they all ate until full. 2 years after Harry and Hermione returned to the magical world, Moody was killed on a raid, and again, things went downhill fast. They'd taken to raiding Death Eater entertainment houses. Torture chambers, brothels, and casinos were other names for them. The mercy and capture attitude that the Order had adhered to when Dumbledore had led them was a thing of the past. Killing fast and quick was de rigueur. Moody had been killed in a raid on an entertainment house. They'd expected a dozen Death Eaters to be inside, but had run into 3 dozen. Harry had personally killed 10 Death Eaters and Hermione 12 before they realized that Moody had bled to death. The loss of the seemingly indestructible Moody hit them all hard. Flitwick had wandered off after that. He'd been increasingly erratic, and it seemed that the last loss had been one too many. Arthur became more reckless and violent. He'd been crossing the line between engaging the enemy and killing for pleasure for quite a while. Harry and Hermione had a long talk with Minerva about it, but never had the opportunity to act. He died when he walked into Diagon Alley, killing everyone he saw. For all intents and purposes, it was suicide. 27 Death Eaters died by his wand before he was cut down by no less than 7 killing curses. Minerva pulled them aside after they lost Arthur. "I want you both to know that I love you like the children I've never had." The usually reserved woman was almost gushing, and it took the young couple by surprise. Recognizing their expression, she smiled wryly and murmured, "I don't know how much time we have left together. I wanted you to know how much you mean to me." A little teary-eyed, Hermione gave the elderly Scot a hug while Harry bussed her cheek. "Thanks, Minerva. We love you too." A runaway lorry hit her the next day. Harry and Hermione had no hope of victory, and they knew it. Moving to a small cottage in Cornwall, they tried to live their lives in obscurity, hidden from the red eye of Voldemort in the tall grass of the Muggle world. It was too late to try and flee. Now, no one got out of Britain, that was. They had another 5 years of bliss alternating with fear. Finally, they'd formalized their relationship, and the local vicar had married them in their lounge. Their neighbors, John and Lee St. James, had stood up with them. 2 years later, they'd been on a scrounging mission when they'd bumped into their worst nightmare. A Death Eater squad walked in on them at the remains of the local grocers. It had been a quick fight. The 7 Death Eaters were dead within 30 seconds, but not before Hermione was hit by a killing curse. Please God, don't let her be dead. But she was weeping now. He closed her eyes and operated them to their home. The rain continued as he lovingly lay her on the chaise lounge and conjured a shovel. His hair matted to his head, rain running in his eyes. He dug his wife's grave amidst her much-loved flowers. After burying her in their garden, he fashioned a headstone for her and laid it atop her final resting place. Hermione Jane Potter. Born September 19th, 1979. Died November 22nd, 2006. Beloved wife and daughter. The smartest witch of the age. Harry didn't leave the house for over a year. John and Lee brought him food. Vicar Smythe stopped by weekly for a half hour. Otherwise, he saw no one and no one saw him. The first month, he drank himself into torpor and stayed there. John St. James took all of Harry's whiskey after that and forced the young widower to sober up. With nothing left, he studied and read. There was one purpose in his pursuits: find a way to save Hermione. He realized he'd gone a little crazy. She was dead. He had buried her with his own hands, after all. First, he'd pursued an answer in necromancy, but the rituals were either ineffective at restoring her, such as creating an inferius, or so morally repugnant that he knew she'd hate him if he successfully brought her back with it. Time turners were an interesting but eventually fruitless path. He found quite a few overviews of the devices, but since they were highly restricted artifacts, there was no detailed information on the mechanics of the device. For times he'd failed in trying to build time turners, although the last had generated quite a powerful explosion that had leveled his workshop. He chuckled as he lay in bed reading essays in Advanced Theoretical Thaumaturgy, volume MMCXII by Viridian Starcan. If only Hermione could see me now. Snorting and shaking his head, he corrected himself. If only Ron could see me now. What he was reading banished all thoughts of his old friend far from his mind. Conjuring the balanced spatial tensions required to create a temporal shift. The focus of the dynamic interface would be a curved field, the parameters of which would be dependent of the magnitudes of the forces involved. Any object that crossed through this curved field would experience a temporal translation, the magnitude of which would also be varied as the interacting forces were altered. Dear God, it's time travel. Hermione had taught him well, and it was immediately apparent to Harry that he was in a quandary. The temporal translation described would allow a steerable opening in the temporal timeline. This would allow him to select the target time to which he wished to return. However, no material would be able to be sent through the field. No material unless one was able to channel all the natural magical energy in the planet. Since that wasn't possible, what could be sent? To most persons, the natural conclusion of a line of thought would have been horrifying. To Harry, who was half crazed with loss and despair, the idea of killing himself in the hopes that his spirit would go back in time was not horrifying at all. Even if it doesn't work, I still get to see her again. At least, if Luna was right, I'll see her again. So began his calculations. 7 different times, he calculated his trip, as he began to call it. The first 5 all came up with different answers. Not inspiring. The 6th and 7th calculations had the same results. He felt far from confident in his figuring. If the gemstones that were to be used to generate and focus the temporal field were slightly off angle, his spirit would explode and he'd cease to exist. He polished off another stale can of stout and threw the can in the bin. Fuck it. What have I got to lose? The next morning, he did something he'd never done before. He went to the local church to pray. He wasn't a believer in the Anglican faith, but he sure needed something now. Staring at the altar, he murmured, "Please, God, help me." He didn't even realize that it was Christmas Day. After an hour of pleading with the deity, he returned home. He'd needed a dozen diamonds, so he'd stolen them from a jeweler's store 2 days before. Not many people could afford such luxuries nowadays. He doubted if the theft would be noticed. Calculations in hand, he went to the only place it made sense to him to perform the ritual and begin his trip. He dumped the diamonds on Hermione's grave and began to lay them in the required pentagonal shape. 3 hours later, he laid out the stones and verified their positions 4 times. Stripping off his clothes, he shivered as he knelt in the center of the diamond pentagram. There was no turning back. He incinerated his notes. Muttering the charging spell, he first felt drained, then saw the diamonds begin to glow a dull blue. The temporal translation field was charged. Tears began to drip down his face as he sat on the ground. A full 5 minutes passed as he sat there, naked in the dirt. Rain began to fall, mixing with his tears. It was as if the heavens were weeping with him. For him. "I love you, Hermione." He placed his wand to his chest over his heart and whispered, "Defendo. .000. Falling. Pain. Noise. Darkness. .000. With a jarring thud, he stopped falling. Opening his eyes, he gasped for air. Once. Twice. Frantically, he looked around, trying to determine when he had shown up. Had he traveled through time, or had the experiment ended badly? Perhaps he was in hell and didn't know it yet. Colors swirled and melded together. Later he would describe it like an exploding rainbow. Shapes began to form. He was staring at the strangest thing. It was familiar, but he just couldn't place it. Gray feathers. Orange eyes. Buck beak. It worked. First things first, Harry quickly bowed. He maintained eye contact with the regal hybrid creature for a long moment. When the half-eagle, half-horse bowed in return, Harry let go the breath he'd been holding and approached his old friend with a little tear in his eye. Gently patting the hippogriff's beak, he barely heard Hagrid's congratulations and follow-on instruction to the class. "She's behind me." He almost burst into tears at the thought. His head swirled and his guts clenched. "Hermione is right behind me. Maybe 10 or 15 feet away. Please, God, let her be behind me." The murmur of the class seemed a cacophony. Hagrid's voice boomed a bass tone that reverberated in his chest. None of the words meant anything. "She's behind me." After a steadying breath, he turned. She was there. Before he could scream for joy, he noticed her face was in a grimace, and she was holding her chest as if she'd been kicked. Her eyes darted left, then right. Locking onto his face, she looked like she didn't know him at first. Then, the largest smile she'd ever had blossomed on her face, and she ran to him. It was the first time he'd ever experienced a complete loss of control of his limbs. He ran to her. Unknowingly, unthinkingly, he ran to her. Desperately embracing his once and future wife, she in turn crushed him to her. He didn't even realize it, but he was murmuring her name over and over in a half-sob. "Oh, Harry." He pulled back and almost fell down in shock. Right after their wedding, they'd been working in the garden of their home in Cornwall, building a trellis. Hermione had slipped and split her brow open on a small boulder they used as a seat. Feeling embarrassed about her clumsiness, she wouldn't heal it with magic, nor let Harry heal it either. "It's an object lesson for me to be more careful." She developed a scar that made a small line through her right eyebrow. Looking at her 13-year-old self, the blood ran into his toes. She had the same scar. Tentatively reaching out to her, toward her scar, he asked in a whisper, "Hermione?" Fingering her brow, she teared up and nodded. "Yes, love. It's me," she answered in a similar whisper. "Ow!" She shrugged and then smiled through her tears. "I'm sure you screwed something up." He laughed. "I'm sure I did." Pulling her close, he almost broke down from happiness. He was back, and by some miracle of heaven, so too was she. .000. "So, what's going on back there?" asked Ron. They were heading back to the castle after the exciting care of magical creatures class. The whole class had been so agog with Harry and Hermione's display of affection that Malfoy had forgotten to be his normal prickish self. The altercation with Buckbeak never happened. His arm around Hermione's shoulders, a smiling Harry asked, "What do you mean, mate?" With red-tipped ears, Ron waved his hands and sputtered, "What I mean you too." He waved his hand at his best friends. Harry glanced at his wife, girlfriend. Best friend? She gave him a nod. We're together, he answered Ron. Ron's face froze, then began to fill up with red. Harry and Hermione were both confused. They were excited to have another chance with their red-headed friend, but didn't understand his upset. They stood there bemused, while their old friend showed all the typical Weasley signs for an impending temper tantrum. Setting his jaw, Ron nodded and said, I see. I'll just leave you lovebirds to it, so you can go snog, right? And he jogged up the trail to the castle. What the fuck was that about? Harry mused aloud. Watching Ron run away, Hermione absently reproved. Language, love. Beats me. You said he had a crush on me 4th year, right? Yeah. Maybe it started 3rd year? Maybe. He stopped, pulling her up as he let the rest of class pass them by. Malfoy sneered as he passed, but the Potters didn't even notice. After the other 3rd years had passed, he placed his arms around her waist in their accustomed place, to which she responded with her arms around his neck. So, were you still my wife? He asked, a little tongue-in-cheek. Smiling, she answered with a passionate kiss that curled his toes and increased his heart rate. A minute later, she was backed up to a tree, her legs around his waist. Harry, wait. Collecting himself, he pulled back and took a deep breath. Sorry, it's been a while, and I think the teenage hormones are kicking in something fierce. She smiled as she straightened her skirt. There was something predatory about her smile that made Harry's own smile broaden. She grabbed his tie and pulled him close. We've been married for over 2 years and been intimate for almost 10. When we have some privacy, I'm going to shag you rotten. Just not here in the open, okay? He smiled and gave her a tender kiss. She saw a tear on his cheek and wiped it away with the pad of her thumb. Hey now, we're together. We got another chance, why the tears? Hugging her tight, he sobbed, I missed you so much. Holding him close, she let his storm pass. Finally, she asked, how long? When I woke up this morning, you've been gone for over a year. She shuddered. I don't remember anything. Last thing before showing up in class was those Death Eaters at the grocer's. He nodded, and they started to amble to the castle, hand in hand. With a small smile, she cast a spell on his face to clean him up. Grateful, he squeezed her hand. Should we tell anyone? She scowled. Not Dumbledore. I trust him about as far as you could throw him. In the years after Hogwarts, they'd had many discussions about Harry's life. With all the danger, pain, and heartache Harry had in his life, they kept coming back to Albus Dumbledore, being taken from Sirius and deposited in the loving embrace of his relatives. The stone, the chamber, Sirius imprisonment, the tournament, the ministry misadventure. All of it circled back to Albus Dumbledore's manipulations and secrets. Agreed. I was thinking about McGonagall and Sirius when we made contact with him, that is. Hermione made a face. I know you loved, or rather love him. But Sirius isn't really stable right now, sweetie. Sighing, he nodded, true. Maybe later. Conceding his desire, she nodded back. Sure. We'll get him with some mind healers and nutritionists to help heal his mind and body. From there, we can talk. Ugh. He shrugged his acceptance and squeezed her hand. What about Remus? He asked. She pursed her lips. My first reaction is no. He owes a lot to Dumbledore, and the old man may call on his markers. Remus is too honorable, and this would put him in quite a bind. I'd rather not tell him just yet. He nodded. Glancing at her, he got a goofy grin. Are you really going to shag me, senseless? Smiling in return, she answered, men. .000. Hey, I get to play Quidditch again. And take divination again. Dropping his head to his chest, he muttered, way to kill the buzzed deer. Hermione laughed in her musical way before she kissed him on the cheek. I'm sure I can make it up to you. He gave her a lecherous leer, saying, I'm sure you can. He reached across the Gryffindor table for the fixings for his lunch. Wiggling her eyebrows, she finished making her own sandwich. Digging into their lunch, they both were overcome with waves of nostalgia. Hundreds of people around them were alive, when just yesterday, to them, they were dead. Even Ron, sitting at the other end of the table, where he was glaring at them, was a very welcome sight. It was like a kick to the gut when he looked to the front table. There, Deep in discussion was a healthy-looking Minerva McGonagall and a chuckling Phileas Flitwick. Harry's head spun a bit as faces of the dead flashed at him. Dumbledore, Hagrid, Oliver Wood, Fred and George, Luna, Neville. Looking over at the Slytherin table, he saw some whom they had helped when the world went in the crapper. Daphne and Astoria Greengrass. Tracy Davis. Of course, his blood began to boil when he saw Draco Malfoy. The baby fat hadn't yet melted off the blonde boy's cheeks, and yet the fucker sat at the Slytherin table, smirking at Harry from across the hall. He glanced at his wife and saw the same sad expression he was sure he must have as well and offered, "Pretty intense." She nodded and sniffed, "Yeah, it is." Taking a big bite of his sandwich, he heard her breath catch. Looking up, he saw Severus Snape stride in the hall for lunch. Harry swallowed and reached for his wand. His instantaneous rage pounded in his ears like the drums calling to war. As his hand dove in his pocket, a slim hand from his right grabbed his arm, and Hermione hissed in his ear, "No, you can't kill him here in the Great Hall. I'm gonna fucking kill him." His fury was roiling his magic into a maelstrom, and it pulsed in time with his heartbeat. "Not here." Panting like a racehorse, Harry glanced down at his plate when Snape looked at him. He'd become fairly proficient in occlumency after they left Hogwarts, but he had no idea if that ability transferred back in time with him. After some mental exercises this evening, he felt that he'd know where he stood. Until then, he'd just avoid eye contact. Nodding to her, he relaxed his body. She rubbed his back and murmured, "I know he killed Neville and Luna. Probably Dumbledore as well. Who knows how many others he destroyed as the head of the camps. I want his head on a pike too, but we really need to talk about this. Are we going to execute people for things they did before? Things they have yet to do? Him and that little shite Malfoy I have no problem killing. Come on, let's get out of here. We need to cool off and talk for a bit." Grabbing his hand, she half dragged him from the hall and out on the grounds. By now, Harry's rage had passed, and after a few deep breaths, he was under control again. "Thanks, love." Nodding to him, she smiled and replied, "I love you. Love you too. So, the real question is, how much do we change?" "Well, what was your plan?" Looking at his feet, he muttered, "Didn't have one." Knowing she was waiting for more, he looked at her. She moved closer to see her normally reserved husband in tears again. "My only plan was to see you again. I didn't think about anything else for a year." Moving close and gently taking him in her arms, she nodded and murmured, "I understand. I'd do the same." Wiping his face, he laughed wetly. "Like hell. You'd have a plan tattooed to your hand." She smiled and then put on a mock-affronted look. "If you're going to be insulting about it, Mr. Potter." "Not at all, Mrs. Potter. All in good fun." She leaned on him and cocked an eyebrow. "Your swearing has become of the dockyard variety." He grimaced. She truly did not like foul language. It made her uncomfortable, and he'd made a real effort to eliminate his cursing. I was alone for a while, and it just got out of hand." Nodding, she smiled impishly. "I'll give you suitable encouragement to reform your behavior." "Now," he asked with a leering grin. She laughed and took off toward the lake. "Catch me if you can," she shouted over her shoulder. Oh. They lay in the tall grass on a short strip of grass between the lake and the forbidden forest, screened from the school by a stand of boulders. He caught her, and they'd kissed for quite a while. "Been a while since we've had a good snog." She rolled her eyes at him before he burst into laughter. "I know how much you hate that word," he teased. "I'm just having a bit of fun." Poking him in the ribs, she said, "Enough funning. Let's get down to work. What is it that we could change, and what should we change?" "Wormtail." "Agreed," she said as she conjured parchment and quill. "Barty Crouch, Jr.? Kill him." She stroked her chin with the quill. Turning to her spouse, she had a bit of grimace when she said, "We may need to leave him in place." Harry began to get angry when he saw her point. Let the tournament happen, then kill Voldemort in the graveyard. But what about Wormtail then? That's how the bastard gets to the graveyard in the first place. Crap. She lay back in the grass and stared at the clouds. After a long moment in contemplation, Hermione asked, "What's our number one priority? Killing Voldemort, right?" With a sigh of resignation, Harry agreed. "Yeah, Sirius gets the shaft." Rising up to her elbow, Hermione scooted closer to her husband. "Not necessarily. If we capture the traitor in the graveyard, we can exonerate Sirius then." Sitting up fully, she began to think aloud. "Or we could convince the DMLE to get a Veritaserum questioning for him." "Sorry, love, the Dementors are already here. That means that fonging idiot Fudge has ordered the kiss for old Padfoot." Right before they'd married, he'd started using the term fong instead of other curse words so as to be able to curse in front of his wife, but not be upbraided for it. Harry thought it was very clever of him. She tolerated his lunacy. He was male after all. Waving her hands at his negativity, she glowered. "As I said, if we get a Veritaserum questioning of him, or maybe we redo the Quibbler article, but this time they interview Padfoot and not you. That could throw enough public doubt on the situation to warrant a real investigation and questioning." Eyes wide and mouth curled in a smile, Harry jumped on Hermione. Laughing, they rolled about in the grass. She shrieked when he began to tickle her. Her retaliation caused squeals of laughter. They ended up entwined and lips pressed together in a passionate embrace that's usually not seen by couples a decade their senior. Breaking apart, he whispered, "I love you so much." "And I you, beloved." Running her hand through his hair in an affectionate, proprietary manner, she then kissed him on the forehead. "What class are we missing?" Rolling off her, he exhaled, "No clue." His face scrunched up as a thought occurred to him. "Love, why are we staying in school? We both can pass our newts today, much less OWLs." Rolling over toward her, he propped his head on his hand and traced imaginary designs on her flat stomach. "We have plenty of money with my inheritance. We never have to work another day in our lives, and we'd still leave our children a fortune. What do you say we kill Voldemort, free Sirius, and then tell the world to bugger off?" She smiled and rolled her eyes. "If I had any doubts that the person in your body was my husband, they've all been erased." Chuckling, she said, "Love, if the Ministry ever found out that we've time traveled, do you really think they'd ever let us out of the Department of Mysteries? We have to play the part." He scowled and nodded. "Too right. Fong." Rolling on her side to face him, she played with the buttons on his shirt. "However, we can still be extremely mature teenagers who study hard and score exceptionally in their courses." "Me?" "Yes, you." She poked him in the chest. "After the incredible trauma of the chamber and the basilisk, you've realized that you really should apply yourself in your studies so you don't have to rely on luck." He looked at her blankly, "Or at least that's what we'll tell everyone." He laughed and leaned in for a kiss. Afterwards, he mentioned, "I'll need to see Minerva tonight. I'm not taking fonging divination with that anointed sovereign of sighs and groans. I'll sign up for runes and arithmancy with you." "And send the back and snog?" He smiled widely. "If you insist, Mrs. Potter." She sat up and looked about. Seeing no one, she disillusioned both of them and then pulled him close. "I find us completely alone, Mr. Potter." "Indeed. I have need of you, husband. .000. 2 hours later, Harry and Hermione knocked on Professor McGonagall's office door. "Enter." Hearing her smooth burr again, they couldn't help smiling to each other as they entered the room. Earlier, after picking grass and burrs out of each other's hair, they'd had quite a long discussion about the advisability of trusting anyone with their secret, even their old friend. "Are you sure we should confide in Minerva?" She frowned and replied, "Yes, I think so. She's Dumbledore's deputy right now. The woman who became a surrogate mother to us was very different than the woman who is up in the castle right now." They went back and forth until Harry finally settled the discussion. "We'll tell her, but if she reacts badly, I'll obliviate her." With a bit of a surprised expression, Hermione asked, "Do you really think that you can get the drop on her?" His only response was a feral grin. Back in the hallway, Hermione preceded Harry into the Gryffindor head of house's quarters. "Mr. Potter, Miss Granger, what is amiss?" Smiling at her, Harry couldn't help himself. Amiss? Professor, why would you think that I'm here because something is amiss? The middle-aged Scot merely cocked an eyebrow, which was tantamount to a belly laugh for her. Hermione gave Harry a playful tap in the ribs and scolded, "Behave." This comfortable, intimate interaction from two of her favorite students caused the other eyebrow to rise. Settling back in her chair, Minerva Fraser McGonagall decided to let them explain to her what was happening. Harry didn't keep her in suspense too long. "Minerva, we've an explanation for you that will explain our newfound attitudes and why I feel it appropriate to address you by your Christian name." "This should be good," the Transfiguration mistress muttered. 2 hours later, they'd opened a 50-year-old Glenmorangie and were halfway down the bottle. Minerva's small pen sieve had been liberally used, and on many occasions, tears had been shed by all three. Wiping her face of wetness after watching Philia spiral into depression and assumed death, she asked, "What's your plan?" "Kill Voldemort, free Sirius, tell Dumbledore to bugger off and live happily ever after." Minerva half glared at Harry before she chuckled. "Seriously, what is your plan?" Harry sighed and unthinkingly took Hermione's hand in his. "I was a bit distraught when I came back. To tell the truth, we really don't have much of a plan. We skived our afternoon classes to have a bit of a talk. I think we've agreed that we need to let this and next year happen in the same manner as last time. In substance, at least." Turning to Hermione, he saw her nod. Harry's expression suddenly hardened. "But I have to tell you, Min, I'm going to kill Snape before the year is out." Having seen their memories and heard the explanation, McGonagall contradicted Harry. "No, you're not." When he glared at her, she finished, "I am." After a long silence, the three erupted in laughter. To an outsider, they'd be calling the local sanatorium to pick up their newest inmates. To a soldier who'd seen the wars, he'd understand completely. This Minerva hadn't fought in the war to come, but she'd fought and lost in the wars that had been. A phrase that the veterans of the American Civil War used was, "They've been in the tall grass and seen the elephant." There is camaraderie amongst soldiers that others can't understand. Through his laughter, Harry said, "Never fuck with a Highland woman or she'll likely tear off your balls and shove them down your throat." "And make you like it," finished Hermione. It was a favorite saying of theirs, and had come about in similar circumstances, though the whiskey hadn't been so fine. Minerva saluted them both with her glass before downing the remains in one go. "You can't tell Albus any of this," the older witch declared forcefully. "His heart is fully for the light, but he'd try to obliviate you both to hell and back before you could finish your first sentence." Hermione nodded. "We'd already come to that conclusion. On top of that, Albus isn't really our friend." She explained about their conclusions regarding the headmaster and his manipulations. Minerva sat back in her chair, nursing her refilled whiskey. "Damn." She stood a little unsteadily. Drawing her wand, she cast a sobriety charm on herself before walking to the window. Looking out over the grounds, she told her abbreviated tale. "Did I tell you about my husband before?" "No, you didn't." She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I loved Jamie from my earliest memory. We grew up together, attended Hogwarts together, and married shortly after graduation. He was killed by Death Eaters when we'd been married for 4 years. Albus came to me and asked me to teach Transfiguration. He'd been selected to be headmaster, and I'd just attained my mastery. I had nothing at home, so I came. I threw myself into teaching and the fight against Voldemort." Bowing her head, she said, "Albus gave me a reason to go on. Teaching and the fight kept me going. What you've told me," she waved at her pen sieve, "and shown me, shakes all I've ever believed about him at the very foundations." Harry and Hermione watched their head of house reminisce with more than a bit of apprehension. Harry's wand was in his hand, lying in his lap. Hermione saw what he was doing and elbowed him. When he looked over at her, she frowned and shook her head in negation. He could almost read her mind. Not yet. Nodding, he turned back to the woman he respected above most else on the planet and waited. After a long moment, Minerva acceded to the desires of her heart. I'll protect your secrets and help you with what I am able. I could do no less for my children, can I? Chapter 2. Fong. Hermione smiled. Sleep well, Harry? The arm of his glasses held in his teeth. Harry rubbed his bloodshot eyes. I'd forgotten how loud Ron snores. Around 1, I gave up and silenced him. On top of it, I wanted to kill Scabbers all night. Chuckling softly, Hermione stood from her chair in the common room before shouldering her bag. Hooking her arm in her husband, she whispered, "My poor husband." With a hint of a grin, Harry asked, "Can you kiss it and make it all better?" She laughed as she rolled her eyes. "Come on, I'm hungry." Walking down to the great hall was a little slice of heaven for Harry. He'd dreamed about this repeatedly for the year he'd been without Hermione. His wide grin was contagious, so by the time they sat at the Gryffindor table, both Potters were grinning like fools. The emotional whiplash from the heights of joy to the depths of despair and back was beginning to wear on the time travelers, though. Hermione spooned herself some porridge, and as she was reaching for the sugar, she asked in a quiet voice, "How's your head?" Harry nodded around his mouth full of eggs. They'd tested each other's occlumency shields the previous night after leaving Minerva's office. After a bit of readjustment to their new minds, both Harry and Hermione were satisfied they could keep the headmaster and potions master out of their minds. Pausing, as if he was reminded of something foul, Harry eventually replied, "I'm okay. Had a bit of a headache last night, but nothing this morning." He didn't look her in the eye while his face paled somewhat. She stared at him, knowing full well that he was hiding something. At the same time, she knew that Harry would tell her when he was ready. When they were teens, the first time, that is, she would have to badger and nag him until he told her what was on her mind. His first instinct was to hide any distress he felt and deny any reason for being upset. It was a product of growing up with those Dursleys. She hated them then and hated them now. Signed to mentally get back on track, she remembered how they made a breakthrough whilst in Cardiff during their preparation phase. It was one of her most painful and wonderful memories. It was the day that Harry completely unburdened himself of his secrets. It was the day that he made the decision to trust her completely with himself. 3 days later, they made love. The two decisions were inextricably linked for both of them. She figured that Harry's nightmares were back. The nightly terrors were either of the Voldemort variety or just plain old regurgitations of the horrors they'd witnessed. Or it could be the horrors in which they'd participated. Those were the most unpleasant nightmares. Just before moving to Cornwall and giving up their resistance to Emperor Voldemort, she and Harry cracked a bottle of gin and tried to count how many Death Eaters they'd killed. They lost count at 232 for him and 219 for her. They didn't even try to estimate how many her lethal wards had killed. That magnitude of butchery changes a person, no matter how justified the acts. The combination of those wonderful facts with sleeping in the same dorm room as his parents' betrayer spurred Hermione to wonder how Harry got any sleep at all. Their discussion tapered off as they watched Luna Lovegood enter the hall. Luna looked very much as she had during their 5th year. Pale blonde hair, protuberant blue eyes with pasty white skin. Instead of the usual preoccupied expression on her face, this morning Luna had a mixed expression of fear and determination, and she was staring right at Harry and Hermione. Oh, Harry muttered. Luna marched over to the mostly empty table of lions, where she stopped right across from Hermione. Her gaze held both the Potters as she stated, "I don't understand why, but everything is different today, and it's because of you two." For the second time in her life, Hermione was stunned into silence. Harry picked up the slack. "Will you join us for breakfast, Luna? We can have a chat after we've eaten." Slowly, Luna sat on the bench across from the time travelers. Harry handed her the orange marmalade, while Hermione poured her a cup of coffee. Luna blinked at the unsolicited provisions. "How did you know these are my favorites?" With a soft, regretful voice, Hermione answered, "Because we're your friends." Stunned, Luna just stared. Eventually, a slow smile drifted across her face. She repeated, "Friends," as she spread the marmalade across her toast. By the time she sipped her coffee, Luna Lovegood had the widest, most genuine smile she'd worn since her mother had died. It was a slow meal. Luna was thoughtfully working her way through her stack of toast. She didn't revisit her earlier assertion, and neither did Harry or Hermione. Harry, and, to a lesser extent, Hermione were both still overwhelmed by the presence of everyone in the hall who had died in their previous incarnation. Luna was overwhelmed for wholly different reasons. She wondered how these people knew about her, and, most importantly, she exulted in the fact that she now had friends. Minerva entered the hall. Staying true to form, she didn't acknowledge the Potters. The three of them had discussed the issue and decided they didn't want to draw any untoward attention from those who would notice any outward show of affection. Hermione tugged on Harry's sleeve, indicating she was ready. Harry caught Luna's attention, so the three students shouldered their satchels and made their way out the front doors toward the lake. Once they settled on two of the benches near the lakeside and Hermione had cast a privacy ward, Harry began. Luna, we'd like to tell you some things, but there's a problem. Some of the people in the castle practice legilimency. Do you know what that is? When she nodded, he continued. Good. The problem with telling you the story is that these persons who practice legilimency will not allow you to keep our secrets. They'll be able to pluck them from your mind against your will. Luna's usual omnipresent, ethereal aura was gone and had been replaced with a hard gaze. Ooh, Hermione sighed. That's part of the secret. The second-year Ravenclaw nodded thoughtfully. It sounds as if we are at an impasse. Crossing her legs, Hermione settled in a bit before she replied, We can test your mind for its natural defenses using legilimency to determine how well your mind is defended. Once we all get a feel for where you stand, Harry and I can help you with defending your thoughts. Hermione stifled the sigh that was working up into her gullet. It had taken her and Harry years of painstaking effort when they were adults to become proficient occlumencers. What hope was there that 12-year-old Luna Lovegood would become proficient in the next decade? With a hint of a shrug, Luna acquiesced. Go ahead. Harry drew his wand and incanted legilimens. Hermione hated to let Harry take the lead when it came to testing and probing others' minds with legilimency. In the end, though, Harry had much stronger capabilities in the discipline. Years of fending off Voldemort's long-distance attacks had forced Harry to become a more than proficient occlumencer. From there was a short step to legilimency. Necessity had been truly the mother of invention. When learning the mind arts, usually women teach women and men teach men. In this case, though, it was necessary for Harry to test Luna. Not even mad, I had been able to keep Harry out of his mind. The once and future Mrs. Potter watched as Harry and Luna engaged in the usual staring match between the legilimencer and occlumencer. After a long minute, Harry muttered, Finite. Turning to Hermione, he just shook his head in negation. Okay, we can begin studying soon. Seeing their blonde-haired friend's downcast expression, Hermione reached out to take her hand. None of that now. This is a very difficult discipline, and I've heard of no one who had natural defenses strong enough to keep Harry out. She finished with a smile, to which Harry rolled his eyes and snorted. There was a long moment of silence as Luna smiled, savoring the fellowship amongst the three of them. Harry's eyes narrowed before he asked, Luna, are you having difficulties with your possessions? Luna blushed and looked at her feet. It's nothing. Everything comes back in the end. Bullshit, spat Hermione. Harry's shocked expression was mirrored on Luna's face. Excuse me, the Ravenclaw asked. It's completely absurd to tolerate theft and harassment as acceptable. You're a good person, Luna, and it's not on to let these prats run roughshod over you. Wide-eyed, Luna sat stock still for an even 10 seconds before she catapulted herself into Hermione's arms. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she repeated in a joyous, sobbing litany. Hermione sniffled as she held the blonde girl. Regret, shame, guilt, and determination were warring within the time-traveling teen. If anyone at Hogwarts should have empathized with Luna, it should have been Harry and her. They knew what it was like to be the outside, shunned and unwanted. Yet in their original 5th year, Harry and Hermione had taken their turn as the popular people and shunned Luna. Emotionally shunned her, that is. Never again, Hermione resolved. The touching scene was interrupted by the first bell sounding over the grounds. Luna gathered herself up, wiping her cheeks and blowing her nose. With gentleness from him that only Hermione recognized, Harry gave Luna an affectionate hug. It was the embrace from an older brother. The Potters watched Luna scamper up the lawn to make her transfiguration class. Harry and Hermione followed at a much more sedate pace. They had runes, and the classroom was across from the Great Hall. Was it bad? Hermione asked. Harry shook his head. After a quick survey, both visually and magically, to see if anyone was listening, he replied, "She's been alone since her mother died. Her dad threw himself into the Quibbler in the aftermath of the accident. Maybe he did it to avoid his grief, I don't know. I didn't know that he's noticeably absent from her memories for the last 3 or 4 years. On top of it, she's a dead ringer for her mom." He shook his head and exhaled forcefully. "I can't count how many memories there were of her crying herself to sleep." Shamefacedly, Hermione sighed. "I can't help remembering how badly I treated her our 5th year. It helps that she isn't so, well, Luna, if you catch my drift." "Yeah." Harry walked in silence for a bit before he came to the only logical conclusion. "I suppose her fanciful behavior was a defense mechanism against the loneliness and grief she felt. After a bit, it became self-perpetuating as she was scorned and rejected here. We'll have to better friends this time." Wrapping her arm around Harry's waist, Hermione nodded in agreement. "Yes, we will." Oh. Roger Davies was very upset when Harry outlined the harassment that Luna was suffering. The 6th-year Ravenclaw chaser thought highly of Harry, the whole air of Slytherin issue aside. "I'll set them straight. Thanks for letting me know, guys." "Runes was interesting," Harry commented as Davies left them behind and they made their way back to Gryffindor Tower. Hermione looked at her husband while a confused expression bloomed. "Huh," she finally asked. Harry smiled. "I know you did your best, but I kind of brute force learned runes before. I never really got the patterns as they repeat through the Norse alphabet." He swallowed a smile and added under his breath, "Of course, I was lusting after you constantly while learning, so a few of your lessons may have been over my head, as they say." She smirked. "I knew. Thank goodness that you finally got up the guts to kiss me. I was about to lose my mind and have my wicked way with you that night anyway." A startled laugh burst out of Harry. "That's it, blame the guy." Satisfaction purred up from her as she leaned into Harry. "You're learning." Their laughter echoed off the high ceilings and stone walls as they passed through the fat lady's portal. Approaching the stairs to the dorms, Harry told Hermione, "I'll just drop my books on my bed. Meet you down here in a few?" She nodded. "I've got to use the toilet, but I'll be down shortly." He gave her a quick peck on the lips before running up the steps. This was the first time that he'd ever been truly joyful whilst at Hogwarts. He mused to himself. The first time through, there were many times when he'd been content and even happy. But now, with Hermione and he properly aligned and no immediate threat of death, he was joyful despite the dark clouds on the horizon. He bounced through the doorway of the 3rd-year boys' dormitory. But before he reached his bed, he heard a sneer. "So, I guess you're shagging her now. Guess you're too good to hang with us lowlives. She must be a right tart, then. Maybe if I had a vault full of gold or nice, you'd hang around with me." The boy who lived froze in place. When Harry got angry, there was one of 2 outcomes. He either burst into a frenzied attack, or he stilled and became quiet. When he became quiet was when he was most dangerous. He'd once killed 19 men after a loud-mouthed Death Eater made comments about Hermione that were quite similar to those just uttered by one Ronald Bilious Weasley. Slowly, he turned to face said Ronald Bilious Weasley, who was sitting on his bed. "What did you say?" Harry whispered, his face a blank mask. Something in Harry's tone, expression, or manner clued Ron into the fact that he had gone too far this time. Somehow, he'd awoken the apex predator which lived in Harry. Too late, The youngest son of Arthur Weasley remembered that Harry had killed a basilisk when he was 12 and beaten the most powerful dark wizard in a score of centuries when he was 11. What the red-headed teen didn't know was that, over a span of 10 years, Harry had learned and perfected the art of killing as quickly and violently as possible. Though his 13-year-old body wasn't as conditioned and toned this time around, the results of that training still showed in how he carried himself. Most found it intimidating, but right now for Ron Weasley, it was chilling. The expression on Ron's face shifted from sneering anger and derision to fear and even terror. Without thought, Harry dropped his satchel on his trunk before gracefully advancing on the redhead. As he glided forward, Harry rasped, "You've been a friend of mine for a long time, Ron. My first real friend, in fact. Because of that, I'm going to overlook this slight against Hermione. The next time, I'm going to rip your tongue out of your head." As Harry loomed over him, Ron began to frantically nod his head and squeak, I'm sorry. I'll never say anything like that again." Stilling, Harry Savidron. Realization dawned on the boy who lived that Ron was a 13-year-old teen that had been extremely sheltered his whole life. In fact, Molly Weasley had stringently coddled her youngest two children. As a result, Ron was more immature than his physical age. It was an unpleasant realization for Harry. Where circumstances had aged Luna Lovegood far beyond her 12 years, circumstances had retarded Ron's maturity to far less than his 13 years. Even before resetting the clock, Harry and Hermione were far older than their birthdays indicated, so he'd never noticed the differences in their red-headed friend. It was always Ron being Ron. Now he saw differently. All this flashed through Harry's mind in an instant. Shaking his head, Harry muttered, "Don't do it again, Ron. I'm sorry I reacted so strongly, but just don't have a go at Hermione." Red-faced and barely in control of his temper, Harry moved to leave the dorm as Ron muttered, "Sure, sorry." Oh. Hermione followed Harry as he stormed out the portrait hole. Catching him out in the passageway, she snatched his arm and spun him about. She didn't even ask him what was wrong. She merely cocked an eyebrow. "Fawning Ron," he exclaimed. Thoroughly confused, she blurted, "What happened?" Visibly regaining control of his emotions, Harry ground out, "He said some less than flattering things about you, me, and the both of us together. I reprimanded him." Stunned at the implications of his statement, she asked, "What did he say?" "You don't want to know." "Yes, I do." Shrugging, the now mostly calm Harry replied, "Fine. He called you a tart because you're shagging me, and told me that I was too arrogant to hang out with him anymore. There are some more things, but you get the idea." There was a long moment of shocked stillness before Hermione spat. "That foul-mouthed, loathsome little toad. I'll show him." Harry gently caught her elbow before wrapping his arm about her shoulders. "I've come to a realization about Ron." She regarded at him expectantly until he finished. "Ron is 13. Hermione deflated. "Yes, he is. On top of that is Molly's coddling, and I suppose that he's really 7 or 8 emotionally." Harry shook his head affectionately as Hermione seamlessly came to the same conclusion that he had not so long before. "He never has been a model for emotional maturity." She trailed off with a look of hurt and despair. Turning to Harry with a tear in her eye, she asked in a quiet voice, "Do you think we can still be friends with him? Do you think he'll want to be friends with us?" Harry shrugged and pulled her close. Despite all of Ron's poor behavior over the years, he was still their friend. Neither Harry nor Hermione had the luxury of discarding friends, so this apparent loss of Ron in their lives was painful. "Come on, let's get some lunch." Hermione nodded at his idea, and they slowly made their way to the Great Hall, arm in arm. .000. Transfiguration after lunch. Hermione nodded, knowing that she was grieving the whole situation with Ron. He held his tongue. She was an introvert and had to make sense of the situation in her mind before she could emotionally digest and accept the situation. It was why she had such a hard time making friends. Finally, she sighed and leaned into her husband's side. "Crap," she muttered. Wrapping his arm about her shoulders, he risked a quick peck on the crown of her head. Whispering into her ear, he affirmed the truth of his whole existence. It'll be okay. We've got each other. In the end, that's all that matters. She sniffed before nodding and burrowing a little more into his arm. 10 points from Gryffindor for a disgusting public display of affection. A hated voice hissed from behind them. Harry stiffened. He was about to rise, spin, and attack the disgusting man, but Hermione's tight grip on the front of his robes kept him seated. It will be further 10 points if you don't move at least 12 inches apart. Now, his muscles taut with tension, Harry slowly removed his arm from Hermione's shoulders and scooted away from her on the bench. Breathing deeply, he bent over his plate and waited for the potion's master to leave. After 10 full seconds of silence, Harry heard the clop-clop of Snape's boots as he walked away. Through gritted teeth, Harry murmured, "I fucking hate him." Hermione didn't even reprove him, just rubbed his thigh under the table. They choked down the balance of their lunch before fleeing the hall for the 4th floor and Transfiguration. They were the first in the door and found Minerva at her desk reviewing a series of reports. Seeing her favorite students ambling in the room, she set the parchment aside. "I usually enjoy being the deputy headmistress." However, she paused and scowled at the pile of reports on her desk. "Right now isn't one of them. I really could care less about the request for another 60 acres to be cleared for pasture." Apparently, Hogwarts was a fully self-sufficient school. There was a whole staff who worked the farming side of the effort. Fields of grain, corn, beans of all shapes and sizes, and of course potatoes. There was also a livestock aspect of the operation which raised the cattle, chickens, and sheep that eventually made themselves to the tables of the Great Hall. "As deputy, I am responsible for the management of the farm as we call it." With a smile, Harry asked, "I gather the task it isn't to your liking?" A scowl was her only reply. Joking aside, Hermione began, "There's a problem in Ravenclaw." She explained about Luna and how they'd talked to Roger Davies. "I think that Roger will take care of the problem, but if you talk to Phileas, we'd feel a lot better about it." Her mouth set in a grim line. The Scot murmured, "Oh, I shall." After a moment, Minerva's scowl melted to a tentative expression. Finally, she asked, "How are you two doing?" Harry shrugged before looking to Hermione. She answered for them, "Some good and some not so good." She laughed softly. "Courses are beyond easy. Social issues are less easy." "Mr. Weasley," Minerva stated. "And Snape," Harry growled. Nodding, Minerva observed, "Mr. Weasley's a young lad. You two are far different." And even before everything changed, she looked at them significantly. "You two have been always far more mature than your peers." "As far as Severus is concerned, has he done anything that would be considered inappropriate?" Harry stared at her in disbelief. "His entire existence is inappropriate." She stared at the boy who lived, not amused. "What my frustrated husband is attempting to tell you is that Professor Snape consistently bullies his students, insults them, and is a general lout. Other than unprofessional conduct, no, he hasn't done anything inappropriate." With one last glare at Harry, Minerva turned to Hermione. "When he displays unprofessional conduct in his class again, document it and have as many of your peers sign the description to testify to the truthfulness of your description. We'll have to build a case against him, as Albus believes the man can do no wrong." After a long pause, Minerva's face fell as a further realization formed in her mind, where he doesn't care what Severus does wrong. Since Harry and Hermione had come to her a few nights previous to disclose their secret, Minerva's opinion of Albus Dumbledore had plummeted. Immediately, she had been disappointed, but the more she reflected on the man's behavior, the more disillusioned she became about the headmaster. Her personal regrets for allowing Albus to run roughshod over her own concerns about the Dursleys' fitness for Harry's guardianship headed the list of situations her new perspective on Albus Dumbledore had caused her to reevaluate. The Potters nodded in sad agreement as the door opened to admit Neville, Parvati, and Lavender. Taking the unspoken cue, the three warriors sat at their respective desks and assumed their professional mien. Class was painful. Dreadfully bored, Harry had to struggle to keep awake while Hermione flipped through the textbook, looking for something, anything, that would hold her interest. She was unsuccessful. Mr. Potter, Miss Granger, stay behind. After the classroom emptied, Minerva cast a silencing charm. I noticed that the topic failed to consume you. In addition to their very personal relationship with Minerva, both Potters respected her greatly as a teacher. Hermione blushed and stammered a response while Harry looked at his shoes. A dry chuckle preceded her question. I was wondering if you'd like to work on the Animagus transformation this year. Her eyes wide, Hermione asked, really? At Minerva's short nod, Hermione gushed, we'd love it. Good. Reaching into her desk, she produced a thick tome. Read this, then come back. You can read it in class if you like. Just cast an illusion to hide you activities from your peers. I shan't call on you in class. With a wide smile, Harry said, thanks, Min. An uncharacteristic smile graced the head of Gryffindor House. It's my pleasure, Harry. Oh. Charms, too, was deadly dull. How are we going to survive? Harry asked as they all filed out. Ron had sat as far away from Harry and Hermione as he could and still be in the classroom. Hermione shrugged before murmuring, talk to Min. As Harry nodded in assent, he froze. Walking toward them was Remus Lupin. Fuck me running, Harry murmured. Hermione was so taken aback that she didn't reprove his profanity. Looking his usual post-full moon pasty and weak, Remus wended his way through the throng of third years, smiling and greeting them as he passed. Tears sprang to the Potter's eyes. Remus had been the first of Harry's family to return. Sirius was next, and then later he'd added Minerva and, of course, Hermione. But Remus had been the first. One of the gentlest men that either Harry or Hermione had ever met. They found out later that he'd been slaughtered like a hog and fed to his fellow Wurs on a full moon in late 2000. Mad, I had told them that his wife, Tonks, had been raped to death in front of Moony before Walden McNair had accomplished his dirty work. It is said that only silver can kill a werewolf, but that is a misnomer. So too can dismemberment and the killing curse. But that's another discussion for another day. Here was Remus Lupin slowly moving down the hallway toward our heroes. When the current defense professor noticed Harry standing along the wall, his amber eyes zeroed in on his pseudo-nephew. The boy who lived caught his breath. As an ickle thirds ter, he'd never picked up on the subtle cues from Remus that he knew Harry, much less that he'd been Uncle Moe. Yet here was their defense professor approaching with an expression of tenderness and affection that was plain to those with eyes to see. Remus nodded his head to the Potters before greeting them. Harry, Hermione. How are you this fine day? We're well, Professor, Hermione choked out. Harry could tell by her tone that she too was overcome by emotion. A tad bemused, Lupin looked back and forth between his third-year students with a small smile playing across his features. Latching onto Harry's gaze once more, he bid them farewell before moving on down the hall. Harry sagged against the wall, Hermione sagging onto him in turn. I need a drink, he muttered. Me too. Come on, let's get our homework done before dinner. We need to go to Gringotts tonight. He nodded wearily, emotionally wrung out and tired. He trudged after his wife to Gryffindor Tower. Homework took a grand total of 17 minutes, followed by a 10-minute supper in the Great Hall. Neither had the emotional reserves to engage any of their peers in discussion, so they fed the monster within before heading to the humpbacked passageway on the third floor. A quick descendium caused the hump of the witch to open wide. Harry bowed and snootily intoned, "After you, milady." Giggling, Hermione curtsied while fanning herself with a conjured hand fan. "Why, thank you, my lord." Cackling, they climbed in the hole and slipped down the short slide. Following the twists and turns of the secret passage, they made their way out from the famous Hogwarts anti-apparition wards. Hermione illuminated her wand so that both she and Harry could inspect the inside of the passageway minutely. If we're going to apparate back to this spot, we should know it pretty well, she'd reasoned. They cast illusions over their features, and with a quick double pop-pop, and they were gone. The The wards funneled the Potters to the corral-looking area that was the apparition center for Diagon Alley. Harry was surprised to see 3 red-robed aurors standing watch at the only non-warded site for the alley. Heads bowed under the hoods of their cloaks, the teens scurried into the darkening shopping district. "What's with the aurors?" Harry asked. "Serious," she replied. Rolling his eyes at his laps, Harry pushed onto the bank. It was time to assert control over the Potter finances. Although Gringotts is a bank, and therefore closes its doors promptly at 5 p.m., its larger depositors have access to the goblins at any time. After hammering on the door of the bank for a minute, a small slide opened and a goblin peered out at Harry. "What do you want?" he snarled. "I'm Harry Potter. Open up. I need to see my account manager." "Oh, the bleeding boy who lived needs in the bank," the goblin mocked. With a grin that was more feral than friendly, Harry snarked back, "Open the damn door before I roast your entrails as an appetizer." The goblin blinked and barked a laugh before sliding the peephole closed. A quick moment later, the door opened. "Get in here, you walking roast." Hermione chuckled under her breath. Directness always pays with goblins. The door warden led the Potters into the office section of Gringotts. After 5 minutes, and over 8 different hallways by Hermione's count, they pulled up in front of a nondescript door. "Snagrats in here," the door warden blurted before turning on his heel and walking away. After a deep, calming breath, Harry opened the door, allowing Hermione to precede him. Inside, they found a middle-aged goblin, the thick tufts of hair sprouting from his ears just beginning to gray. Without looking up from his desk, Snagrat barked, "What?" "I'm Harry Potter, and I want to talk about my money." Looking up from the parchment in his hands, Snagrat peered at the teen. His eyes cutting to Hermione, he again barked, "Who's she?" "My wife." Now Snagrat's thick, furry eyebrows shot up in surprise. Leaning back in his chair, he motioned to 2 empty chairs across his desk. "Really? Have a seat, Mr. and Mrs. Potter." Delving straight into business. Directness is valued by the goblins after all, Harry began. "We are here for me to assert control over the Potter Trust and all other fiduciary holdings, as well as add my wife to set accounts." The goblin nodded thoughtfully while scrutinizing Harry and Hermione. After a long pause, he finally told them, "You are not of age. Your legal guardian has not designated you in writing to assert control over your inheritance, so I cannot facilitate your request." Turning to Hermione, he scanned her again before adding, "But we can add your wife to your trust fund account." Dreading the answer, Harry asked, "Who do you have on record as my legal guardian?" Without hesitation, Snagrat replied, "Sirius Black. Since he is imprisoned, or rather was imprisoned and now a fugitive, the title has temporarily devolved to Albus Dumbledore." "Fong," Harry muttered. "At least it's not the Dursleys." "Snagrat," Hermione began, "what is the source of those choices of guardian?" "James Potter's will, of course." But Harry was thoroughly confused now. Why had he been able to gain control over his finances before, and he couldn't now? He stopped as Hermione muttered to him, "Last time, you'd completed your OWLS and both of them were dead. That's why you got control." Thinking hard, Harry asked, "Are the accounts monitored for activity?" A slight grin graced the taciturn goblin. "Any transaction under 1,000 galleons does not require a notice to your guardian." Obviously, Snagrat was going to make Harry work for his answers. Hermione continued the line of thought, "And how many 999 galleon transactions can take place within a specified period of time before my husband's guardian is notified?" The grin blossomed into a smirk. "There is no stipulation along those lines." Nodding, Hermione followed up, "The current account balance?" 50,000 galleons. It is refilled from the primary Potter vaults every 6 months. Hermione temporized. "Finally," she smiled. "Snagrat, may my husband assert reporting requirements over the Potter accounts and holdings as well?" When Snagrat barked a laugh, she smiled in return. "Say, for any withdrawal not made by myself or my husband?" Snagrat looked to Harry, who merely nodded in concurrence. It shall be done. One last thing Hermione mentioned. We would like a complete accounting and report of the activity of the Potter estate since the death of James and Lily Potter. Glaring at Hermione, Snagrat barked, 50 galleons and 4 weeks. Harry stood. Thank you for your help, Snagrat. We'll show ourselves out. Oh. Well, that was less than helpful. Harry grumbled on the way out of the bank. Yes and no, Hermione countered. We'll know if Albus is helping himself to our money, and if we really want to, we can siphon just short of 1,000 every few days into offshore accounts. And if we find out Dumbledore is stealing from us. Chewing her lip, Hermione thought for a minute. Finally, she explained, I don't think he's doing that. When Harry scowled, she continued, Look, he's a cold-hearted bastard who has no compunction ruining the lives around him if he feels it's necessary. But he's not a thief. She paused, considering her statement. I think. Harry shrugged, but remained quiet. Deep down, he knew she was right, but didn't want to admit it. He'd want to try and gain a level of control over his life in just this one way. It was something that frustrated him to no end. Harry always had felt that he never had any control over his life, that forces pushed him this way, and that, never letting him strike out on his own. Voldemort, Dumbledore, Dursley's wizarding public as a whole, all of them pushed, prodded, or drove him in ways that he'd rather not go. Fong, Harry muttered. She wrapped her arm around his waist as they meandered through the late-night crowds, slowly heading toward the apparition point. Oh. I'm not looking forward to this lesson, Harry murmured as they entered the potions classroom. Setting her books on the work table, Hermione agreed. Neither am I. Setting her satchel on the floor, leaning against the table's leg, she added, For God's sake, don't look him in the eye. Harry rolled his eyes, only to be punched in the arm by his wife. Ow, that hurt. She huffed in humorous annoyance as she prepared her parchment for note-taking. Bang! The door slammed shut as Snape strode in the classroom, his sneer more pronounced than usual. Be careful, it'll stick that way, Harry whispered. Her eyes widened just a tad as Hermione ruthlessly suppressed her laughter. Potter, 10 points from Gryffindor for disrupting my class. Red-faced, Harry stared at the tabletop. Hermione's hand on his thigh was the only thing that kept him in his seat. I was talking to you, Potter. Look at me. Slowly, Harry raised his face to the sallow face goad. Somehow, he had the presence of mind to avoid Snape's gaze. Struggling with his fury, Harry concentrated on a spot just over the man's shoulder. Pitiful, Snape spat as he moved to the front of the classroom. Harry's head jerked back down to the table with an appearance of calm, but he was literally vibrating with rage. The only reason the shrinking solution he and Hermione were working on wasn't a cauldron full of boiled shit was because Hermione did everything. Harry was only capable of going through the motions. By the end of the lesson, Harry had almost lost control 3 separate times. Snape had continued his persecution of the boy who lived to the point where even some of the Slytherins were frowning. Daphne Greengrass and Blaise Zabini, in particular, watched Harry's torment with expressions approaching disapprobation. As Harry and Hermione exited the classroom, Harry felt a hand gently grasp his shoulder. Turning swiftly, Harry had to forcibly quash the urge to attack when he recognized Neville Longbottom. Are you all right, Harry? Letting a shaky breath leak out between his teeth, Harry shrugged. The 3 Gryffindors silently wound out of the dungeons. When they were finally alone, Neville spoke. He was completely out of order. Harry, you didn't deserve that. You're the best person I know. Nonplussed, Harry stared at his friend. This was the Neville of late 5th year. This was the kind young man who stood up for his friends and began to break out of his shy shell. What had changed? Hermione added, I agree, Neville. Touched, Harry nodded jerkily. Thanks, guys. It means a lot for you to say those things. Thanks. With a faint smile, Neville added, Sure thing, mate. Neville, Hermione began, I'm going to write a summary of the lesson and Professor Snape's bad behavior. Would you be willing to sign it to attest to its truthfulness? Knowing exactly what Hermione was doing, Neville considered her for a long minute. Finally, he nodded and told her, "Sure thing, Hermione. I'll even try to help you convince our classmates to sign it as well." Now was Hermione's turn to be surprised. "Thanks, Neville." Oh. It was late as Harry and Hermione sat on the steps of the castle. There were 10 minutes until curfew, and the two wanted to stretch out their time alone until the last minute. Harry also had his cloak, but they didn't want to arouse the headmaster's suspicion just yet by prowling about after hours. "Are we going to tell them?" she whispered. "Neville and Luna?" he asked. Her nod was sad, for she knew the answer already. "We can't," he admitted for them both. Nodding, she curled into his arms. Their task seemed even more difficult this evening than it had the first day back. They only had themselves and Minerva as allies in the know. They'd never felt so isolated in their life. The other Gryffindors were already noticing how different Harry and Hermione had been acting. Ron was making fast friends with Dean and Seamus. It looked like their friendship with the youngest Weasley male was well and truly dead. "I thought everything would be wonderful if I got back," he breathed. "I've got you." He affectionately squeezed the witch in his arms. "And in the end, that's all that really matters." But he trailed off. Hermione stood before pulling Harry to his feet. Instinctively, they made their way back to Gryffindor Tower. "But it's still pretty lonely," she finished for him, as if there had been no interruption. "Yeah, you've Quidditch practice tomorrow," she supplied. Smiling, Harry nodded. "I do indeed. Thank God for that." "I know you missed it," she observed. "I did indeed." Pinching her bum, he teased, "Not as much as you, though." In a flash, she had him pinned to the wall. Kissing him fiercely, she pressed her pubescent body to his. After a moment, Harry's mind caught up to her body and reciprocated in kind. This wasn't about love. It was about pain and finding solace in each other, even if it was only a temporary reprieve. They trusted each other completely with their bodies, minds, and souls. A bit of snogging never hurt anyone. Breaking off the kiss, Hermione panted, "Thanks, I needed that." His crooked smile firmly in place. He kissed her neck before muttering, "Anytime, my love." "Come on, we're going to be late." Gray eyes watched the young couple move hand in hand down the hallway before turning toward the grounds and loping into the forest. Oh. "Ah, crap," Harry muttered as they entered defense class. Hermione murmured from her seat next to him. "Bog it today." "Oh." The problem immediately bloomed, fully formed in her mind. Any of the many scenes of death and destruction from the war could show up. Or worse, one of the many times Harry had been wounded. Or, turning to Harry, she saw his despairing gaze focused on her. She knew exactly what Harry's boggart would be. Not a dead Sirius, not a Dementor, not even a mutilated Ron. It would be her corpse as it had been on the evening of November 22nd, 2006. Blindly grasping his hand, she murmured, "I'm here. I'm never leaving you again." A minuscule tear tracked down his left cheek. "What if you can't help it?" She bolted from her seat, dragging him out of the classroom to surprise glances from the other students who were also early. Not caring about what any others were thinking, she pulled Harry into a broom closet. Holding him tight, the emotions burst from both of them as they wept without restraint. Neither noticed when the door silently opened, nor did they notice the man watching them with a concerned expression on his scarred face. "Harry, Hermione, are you well?" Breaking apart, they hastily wiped their faces. Sniffling back tears, Harry murmured, "I'm fine, Moony. Just give us a minute." Hermione froze. A heartbeat later, so too did Harry. Slowly turning to face their defense professor, they saw a white-faced Remus Lupin. What did you just call me?" he rasped. "Yeah, sorry, sir. I'm just a bit worked up," he stammered. "A bit of bad news from home." Staring at Harry as if seeing him for the first time, Remus had the beginning of a smile lurking about the corners of his mouth. "No, you called me Moony." Wrong-footed, awash with emotion from a variety of sources, Harry and Hermione, could only gape. A gentle expression crossed Remus' face. "We can talk about this after class? At promlet? Oh. Fong, fong, fong." Harry had been muttering under his breath for the last 5 minutes, and his litany hadn't changed a bit. At the end of her patience, Hermione viciously jabbed him in the side with her finger. "Enough." Letting a shaky breath wander out, Harry nodded and got control of himself. "Thanks," he muttered to her. All the while, Remus had been lecturing on boggots and the spell to drive them away. Finally, he instructed the students to form a line to combat the magical creature. Neville encountered Boggart Snape again. Once again, at the cry of "ridiculous" by the Longbottom Scion, the class rollicked with laughter as the Boggart Snape suddenly was wearing clothes of the style Lady Augusta Longbottom preferred. The Boggart became a mummy, a banshee, a rat, a rattlesnake, a bloody eyeball, a severed hand, and a spider, followed by Remus' intervention. Once again, it settled on the full moon. After banishing the creature back to its wardrobe, Lupin jovially dismissed the class, with a significant glance at Harry and Hermione. Loitering under the pretense of repacking Hermione's bag, the time travelers were the last students in the classroom. With an inviting smile and inquisitive expression, Remus indicated his office off the classroom. "Shall we?" Resignedly, Harry nodded. As he followed Remus up the stairs, Hermione whispered, "Maybe this is for the best." Acknowledging her, he nodded. They settled into 3 chairs in round-robin fashion when Remus offered, "I'd suggest tea, but you two seem far too nervous for that." When they weakly returned his smile, he leaned back in his chair, doing everything he could to make the students as comfortable as he could. It was obvious they were very stressed about something. He was stunned when Harry drew his wand and immobilized the 2 paintings in the office. Remus was further confused when Harry looked to Hermione and asked, "Val?" She considered before turning to Remus and asking, "How susceptible to legitimacy are you considering your lycanthropy?" That question was on a very short list of the most unexpected questions he'd ever consider hearing from his pseudo-nephew and his best friend. Flummoxed, he croaked, "What?" Sighing, Harry explained a bit. "I know about the Marauders and how they got their nicknames." With an expression of tender understanding, he continued, "And I know why they got their nicknames as well. Because they love their brother." Completely nonplussed, Remus merely stared at the 2 teens. Tentatively, Hermione told him, "We have secrets. Dumbledore and Snape have no compunction using legitimacy to scan a person's mind. Given your history with Snape in especial, we need to know about your ability to defend your mind and, by extension, our secrets." Blinking, Remus nodded. Regaining his composure, he explained, "The spirit of the wolf defends my mind. Any legilimencer's mind would be ripped to shreds if he tried to assault me." Harry sighed, exchanged a glance with Hermione before saying, "I trust you, Moony. I trust you with my life, but at the same time, you owe Dumbledore. The old man isn't afraid to call in that debt if he feels he needs something. We'll need an unbreakable vow that you'll never disclose our secrets." Remus blinked. After a moment, he questioned, "Your secrets are that important?" "Life and death," Harry replied in a solemn tone. Pursing his lips, Remus considered. Unbreakable vows were not to be taken lightly. At the same time, he wanted to be of use to Harry. After the little scene in the broom closet, it was obvious that Harry and Hermione were in need of help. If he could be of service to his deceased friend's son, then he had to make himself available. At the same time, this wasn't about James and Lily. It was about Harry, the boy who he'd not seen in a dozen years. The boy whom he'd loved as a toddler, who he wanted to love again as a young man. Deciding, he told them, "I'll vow to never willingly disclose your secrets. Veritasrum can overcome anything, though. I'll only willingly discuss your secrets with you or anyone else in the know." Nodding his head, Harry agreed. 10 seconds later, the vow had been made with Hermione as their binder. "Where to start?" Harry murmured. Hermione interrupted Harry by beginning the explanation. "We have the memories of our 27-year-old selves. We know what is going to happen and how. For example, this year, we all find out that Sirius is innocent and Peter was the betrayer. Next year, Peter will be instrumental in the resurrection of Voldemort. After that, the reign of terror from the 70s will be revisited tenfold. 1,000-fold, Harry added, his eyes staring far away. Completely taken aback once again, Remus repeated, Sirius is innocent. Nodding with a sad smile, Hermione added, and will soon be living in the shack. Leaning forward, Remus took his head in his hands and wept. He wept for Sirius, whom he'd long hated. He wept for Peter, the poor stupid boy he'd been to be so led astray. He wept for James, Lily, and Harry, the family which had been rent asunder. He wept for himself and all the sorrow and grief he'd experienced alone over the last decade. Feeling a hand on his shoulder, Remus looked up to find Harry and Hermione kneeling in front of him with their arms looped around his shoulders in a gentle embrace. I'm sorry, Moini. I'm sorry you've suffered. Shaking away his tears, Remus embraced them both. His new family. What else? He asked. They all resettled in their seats, wiping eyes and blowing noses for a moment. Hermione chewed her lip as she considered Remus' question. Turning to her husband, she shrugged. Harry replied for them both. Nothing else is really important right now. Our goal is to destroy Voldemort once and for all during the resurrection ceremony next year. Everything after that should just be bad memories for us. Nodding his head in understanding, Remus asked, How can I help? Oh. Hermione trailed Harry down to the Quidditch pitch. He had his trusty Nimbus 2000 slung over his shoulder and nearly bounced into the changing rooms with Katie and the twins. Climbing the stands, she unslung her satchel. Conjuring a lap desk, she set about wrapping up her homework for the next few weeks. Smiling, she realized that she had every intention of allowing Harry to copy her homework. It's not that he didn't know the material. He just had much better things to do with his time. Like her. Sighing, she admitted that she and Harry needed some private time and soon. Surprisingly, her early teenage body was more than capable of keeping up with her mature libido. Based on Harry's comments, gropes and searing kisses, so too was his body. Sex was something that she'd never really given much thought towards. Until their first time they'd been together, that is. In retrospect, it had been uncoordinated, painful, and completely wonderful. She had made love with the love of her life. There's no score, award, or other measure except that of love, and make no mistake, she loved Harry Potter, with all off her heart and soul. He owned her by her own surrender, and she, in turn, owned him. An hour after the team entered the changing rooms, they exited en masse. As they shot into the skies, she had a grin as Harry looped and barrel rolled across the pitch, shouting to the heavens. Where Hermione found her solace in books, Harry found his in the skies. It had been far too long for him to be on a broom. Nearly a decade, as a matter of fact. She couldn't help but admire Oliver Wood's single-mindedness and devotion to Quidditch. In her heart, she recognized a fellow devotee. Where she devoted herself to learning and academic pursuits, she saw Oliver devoting himself to the sport of Quidditch. Now that she was a few years older, she could admit, to herself at least, that there was nothing ignoble about pursuing a career in Quidditch. Wondering if Harry would ever want to pursue a professional career in the sport, her mind was undecided. He certainly had the talent and enthusiasm for it. At the same time, with Harry's extraordinary disdain for attention, the combination of being the boy who lived and a Quidditch star might just quash the idea before it bloomed. They'd have to discuss it. Despite all the gloom and darkness that overshadowed their lives due to the curse of Voldemort, they had another chance to live. Truly live their lives, and it wasn't to be squandered. So, she talked to her husband about a Quidditch career. Shouts and other horseplay refocused her attention on the players. Fred and George in specific. Hermione stifled a laugh at the twins' capers. They were currently teasing Harry about dating Hermione, and she had to admit they were quite funny. They weren't saying anything malicious, just embarrassing. She could tell that Harry was forcing a stern expression, but really wanted a laugh. Ducking a bludger, He finally let go a deep belly laugh. Finally, a bit of levity, she exhaled. High on the bleachers, a large black dog silently watched the practice. Oh. We need the map, Harry proclaimed the next day as he watched the twins enter the common room. Hermione nodded in agreement. I agree. Earlier, when we were talking to Moony, I was about to ask you for it when I remembered that you don't have it yet. I'm about to get it right now. Want to help? Sure, she shrugged before placing her book in her satchel. Harry called after the twins, Oi, lads. Let's have a bit of a talk. Sure, mate. Where? With the ghost of a smile, Harry told Fred, follow us and learn. George snorted before snarking. Oh, yes. Show us and teach us, a wise one. Harry smiled at Hermione, who returned it with a mischievous grin of her own. Dashing through the first secret passageway, just to the right out of the fat lady, they wound up to the 7th floor in the dusty passageway. How the bloody hell did you find this place? George asked bewilderedly. Oh, I know some people. Like who? Fred asked. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, Harry replied with a smile. Floored, Fred and George stopped in front of the troll tapestry with Barney the Barmy, tried to teach the trolls how to dance. How do you know them? George prodded. Both twins' faces were a mixture of confusion, suspicion, and awe. Nonchalantly, Harry shrugged. My dad was Prongs. No fucking way. Way, Harry replied with another grin. Turning to Hermione, Fred told her, don't listen to this next part. After her chuckle, Fred turned back to Harry and intoned, Son of Prongs, we, the twins Weasley, stand by to be instructed. School us, a wise one. Now Harry, Hermione, and George were laughing. Wiping his eyes, Harry gestured to the wall. Lads, I propose a trade. The map for a room that isn't on the map. A room that is extraordinarily wonderful. Done, George replied without a moment's hesitation. Fred dug into his left pocket before producing the very familiar bit of old parchment. Gently, Harry took it, caressed it once before pocketing it himself. With another smile, he added, to sweeten the pot, I'll introduce you to Moony. Fred fainted. George wept. I love you, Harry, George croaked as he revived his brother. Shaking his head, Harry asked Hermione, Room of Lost Things? Sure, why not? Harry began pacing back and forth in the hallway while Fred and George watched him, bewilderment evident on their faces. After the third pass, a large oak door appeared. With a flourish, Harry told them, Gentlemen, after you. George opened the door, Fred peeking over his brother's shoulder. What the? This is the room of requirement. If you concentrate on what you need from the room whilst pacing back and forth in front of the section of wall, it will provide. Fuck me running. George, language. Without looking at her, he murmured, Sorry, Hermione. Harry, this place is, well, it's... Fred tailed off. Yeah, it is. Harry confirmed. Shaking his head, as if in a daze, George turned to the boy who lived and asked, So, Moony. Chapter 3. Crookshanks was curled up in Hermione's lap as she cuddled into Harry's side. It had been a quiet night for the couple as they hung out in the common room with the Quidditch team. Hermione was becoming quite friendly with the girls. Angelina loved runes while Alicia and Katie were budding arithmeters. She was glad to see that Braun didn't always exclude Brain for the Chaser line. It was late, so their friends had drifted off to various activities. Homework, prank planning for the twins, and more Quidditch prep for Oliver. This left Harry and Hermione comfortably alone. Surreptitiously, Harry had opened the Marauder's map to activate it. Looky here. Someone's being a bad puppy, Harry whispered with an amused tone. Hermione looked at the map and followed Harry's finger to the footprints labeled Padfoot. He was down by the lake and stationary. Should we? He asked. Bring him some food and warm clothes, she replied. He closed his eyes in gratitude for her cooperation. Thanks, love. Give me a minute to grab my cloak, and we'll head to the kitchens. A teasing smile graced her face as she needled. Are you a wizard or what? Drawing her wand from a recently purchased wrist holster, she gave a slight flick. First, her cloak zoomed down the steps for the girls' dormitory, followed shortly by Harry's from the boys' dorm. Hanging his head, he asked, "I'm never going to live that down, am I?" Smiling, she kissed his cheek. "Nope." Wrapping her cloak across her shoulders, he gave her a playful nudge. "Come on, let's get to the kitchens." 10 minutes later, they had a basket of food on top of which was two thick wool blankets. "We'll get his measurements I'll order him some outdoor-type clothes." Hermione seemed just as excited to see Sirius as Harry was. He smiled at her eagerness, grateful for her positive attitude. They poured out the front gate of the castle and were nearly running toward the lake when Hermione abruptly called, "Harry, wait." Confused, he turned to her expectantly. "We shouldn't do this," she groaned. A flash of anger crossed his face before he reined it in. "What do you mean?" Moving to a massive tree stump, she sat with a dispirited sigh. "We have no explanation for how we know Sirius, much less knowing that he's innocent. Based on all your before knowledge, you should hate him, not be bringing him food and clothing. He'd know something was up if we find him tonight, and we're all happy to see him and such." Harry visibly deflated Fong. Moving to her side, he sat on the other half of the stump. The smartest witch of the age frowned slightly, but plowed on. "We can get this stuff to Moony. He, in turn, can get it to Sirius. After that, we have an excuse as Remus will have told us the truth, and we can approach Padfoot with our cover intact." Nodding in agreement, Harry sighed before he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Slowly, they stood to make their way to the castle. The Grim in the shadows watched them for a long moment, before settling down to wait for his surviving best friend to come out of the castle. He had quite a few questions for Moony. "Oh. He's on the grounds?" Remus asked with an odd mixture of excitement and trepidation. Harry pulled the map out of his pocket and, after a moment's hesitation, handed it to Remus. "Would you like to do the honors?" A sad smile crossed Mooney's face as he drew his wand, tapped the map, and whispered, "I solemnly swear I am up to no good." For some peculiar reason, it was a moment of great import for all in the room. Mooney was activating the map to find Padfoot. The ghosts of Hogwarts past swirled about them. Quickly scanning the map, Remus nodded to himself. "He's outside the main doors under that little stand of hemlock trees." Shrinking the food and blankets, he stuffed them in his pocket. "Head back to the tower. I don't know how long I'll be. If I don't fetch you before curfew, we'll catch up after breakfast." Harry nodded as he helped Hermione to her feet. "We need to find a safe hideout for him," Hermione mused aloud. "Not Black Manor," Harry declared. "He went there?" Remus asked in a shocked voice. "Yep," Dumbledore insisted. "Said the wards were the best he could find. Being there damn near drove Padfoot completely round the twist, too. He'll not go back there." Harry's face was drawn as he spoke, but his jaw set in an expression all too familiar to Hermione. He wasn't changing his mind on this one. As the threesome moved down the empty hall, Remus muttered, "What about Rowan Hill?" Not understanding the reference, Harry asked, "What's a Rowan Hill?" Now Remus was confused. "You've never been to the Potter ancestral home?" "Obviously not." "We'll figure this out tomorrow, too. For now, know that it's your family's home on the coast of Cardigan Bay in Wales. The head of the family has always lived there going back to the time of the court of Camelot." At the next intersection, the Potters headed off to Gryffindor Tower, while Remus headed to the entrance hall, and from there, the lawn of Hogwarts. "Do you think it'll be okay?" Hermione asked. When Harry gave her a questioning look, she continued, "With Padfoot and Moony?" Harry gave a cynical snort. "I'm sure Padfoot will kick the fong out of Moony for not believing in his innocence before giving him the biggest hug Moony's ever received." A faint smile crossed her face. "I do believe you're right." Oh. The next morning at breakfast, Harry and Hermione were first in the Great Hall. Remus hadn't come to them by midnight, so they hurried to the Great Hall, hoping he'd come early. Books spread in front of them, they made a convincing show of reading ahead for their courses. No one caught on to the fact that the 4 books spread were magical copies of Minerva's Inimagus transformation book. Love, Did you get this part on page 173? Harry asked in a distracted undertone. Flipping back a few pages, Hermione asked in turn, the part about instincts and possible conflicts? Yeah, well, the way I understand it is. She broke off as Remus Lupin limped into the hall. A small smirk crossed Harry's face as he mentally paid himself £5 for the bet he'd made with himself the previous night. Padfoot had laid a wallop on Moony that lasted until morning. The grim expression on Remus' face drove off all humor, though. Without preamble, he asked them, "Are you two done?" When they nodded, he motioned to them, "Let's go, we've quite a bit to discuss." He spun on his heel, making his way out of the Great Hall at a quick clip. Scrambling to pack their satchels, Harry and Hermione eventually made their way to the defense professor's office. While Harry froze the portraits in the room, Remus cast a privacy ward that surprised Hermione. It not only prevented magical or mundane eavesdropping, but also stunned a person who came within 15 feet of the ward line. "Serious nose," Remus declared with a solemn expression. "Oh shit," Harry groaned. Dropping into a chair, he briskly ran his hands through his hair. A bit more demurely, Hermione sat next to her husband. "To be clear, what exactly does Sirius know?" "He knows that you've time-traveled in some way. He knows that you're playing a part here. He knows that you know he's innocent. He knows that I'm under an unbreakable vow not to reveal your secrets." "Well," Hermione began before trailing off weakly. "Well, I guess that changes things." She looked to Harry and shrugged. It seemed that all their plans were being torn to ribbons. "I also saw something on the map," Remus growled. "Fuck," Harry griped. "Did you kill him?" "Not yet. I'm going to get him right now, though." "Look," Harry placated, "let me go get Peter. It will be a lot less conspicuous for me to go to the third-year boys' dormitory than you. I'll bring him back here and we can talk." "But what about?" Hermione asked. "If we decide to let him go, we'll memory charm him to hell and back." Harry stood to leave. Remembering, he said to Hermione, "Could you fetch Minerva?" To Remus, he asked, "And could you go fetch our wayward stray? I think a council of war is needed now. I'm completely at sea with this." The threesome dispersed on their assigned errands, worry stamped on each face. Minerva McGonagall had just made one of the more difficult decisions of her life. She had decided to break with Albus Dumbledore and his leadership. Blindly following would be too strong a characterization for her behavior over the last 40 or so years. "But bloody close," she muttered to herself. Always considering herself an independent woman, Minerva was heartily ashamed of her lapdog-like following of the headmaster. Her father had been a farmer and a Highlander to boot. Life had never been easy on their small farm 50 miles northwest of Inverness. From sunup to sundown, Ian Fraser had worked the land. Magic had helped, but the fields weren't very fruitful, so every harvest had been hard won. He had taught his daughters through words and deeds to be independent. Always form your own opinions. Never allow another to tell you how to think had been his message. A twofold assignment. Minerva and her sister Venus had the responsibility for tending the family's small herd of Angora goats. Milking twice a day, shearing in the spring followed by washing and spinning the wool. It taught them responsibility, and it also taught them to be aware of their charges. Ian and Jenny Fraser never checked on the goats. They were for the girls to mind. Lessons like that had formed and built the foundation of the woman she became. She didn't find out until her father died, but he had saved every galleon he could to put toward his daughter's education. He was not an erudite man, but he loved his family in his stoic way. To say that she had loved her father fell far short of her true emotion. Respected, venerated, and even revered at times, Ian Fraser was as close to a deity as Minerva allowed in her life. Ian had died far too young. It was a freak accident. He was mending a fence line on a clear sunny day when a bolt of lightning killed him. Jamie McGonagall had been her rock during her grief. They'd always been playmates and later classmates when they started Hogwarts together. She fell in love with him as he showed the side of himself that cradled, protected, and loved her when she was unable to care for herself. Binding her so tightly to him with his love, care, and support, it completely devastated Minerva when the Death Eaters had called on their home late one evening. A decapitation curse made Minerva a widow at the age of 23. She was catatonic for nearly a month. The house elves fed her as if she were a newborn. Sally and Maeve cleaned up their mistress' mess, kept the house, and did the shopping. When Albus Dumbledore called, he had to use magic to bring her around. She didn't respond to any stimuli until Albus leveraged his immense magical strength to cast the strongest cheering charm many had ever seen. He wasn't a truly bad man. Minerva liked to believe that he really did care for her well-being. Common sense told her that there are very few people on the planet who are truly evil. Despite his actions, she didn't believe him to be one of those few. Voldemort, on the other hand. Nevertheless, Albus lifted her up to allow her to stand once more. He gave her an outlet for her grief and activity for her mind. Truly, he had saved her life. She was under no illusions regarding how long she would have lasted otherwise. Wasting away or suicide was just around the corner for her. It's most likely possible that Albus had taken Father's place, she murmured to herself late the night before. And I transferred a child's unblinking devotion from her father to a father-like person. Father had his flaws, a quick temper being the most glaring, but he was a beacon for me in my childhood. Her head bowed. She admitted, yes, I put Albus in the same place. I made him my beacon when I shouldn't have. The most shameful aspect of the situation for her was that she had done it of her own free will. This was not her father, nor yet the love of her life. He was her supervisor, no more and no less. Oh, there were extenuating circumstances. She was well aware of that ugly fact. Her father had died unexpectedly. Her husband had been savagely murdered. In the end, though, she had blindly followed a man to the near ruin of many lives. If Harry and Hermione's experience of what was to come occurred, it would be to the ruin of millions of lives. She never seriously challenged or questioned him. She never exerted herself when her gut screamed that she was in the right. That night in Surrey, her instincts were roaring to take the Potter boy far from the disgusting people in the home at 4 Privet Drive. Yet she did not. She followed the soothing, honeyed words of Albus Dumbledore. Benji Fenwick, Edgar Bones, James Potter, Lily Potter, Gideon Pruitt, Fabian Pruitt. The list went on ad infinitum. Never again. And so she wept. She wept for herself and her lost father from so many years before. She wept for baby Harry who'd lost his parents. She wept for the Harry of today who'd lost everyone because of the poor leadership and guidance of an old man. She wept for Albus because he would never admit nor see his flaws. It was a long night for Minerva. She never expected the turmoil of the next day. If she had, she'd most likely have taken a few days off to visit relatives. Or maybe not. A rapid knocking on the portrait door warden interrupted her morning. Somewhat groggy from her long night, she yelled, "Open!" Hermione Granger, or was it Potter, fell through the doorway. Bouncing to her feet, she snapped, "Come to Remus quarters, we've a problem." Oh. Harry dashed through the hall, the breeze whipping his hair this way and that. Finally, I get to do something. Harry was very much an action person. Despite Severus Snape's taunting, Harry was no moron. His IQ was a mere 7 points below Hermione's. However, where her talent primarily lay in the ability to exercise abstract thought to a finite conclusion, his strength lay in the ability to fuse many variables to a course of action in the blink of an eye. Their original plan to let the timeline proceed had been a viable one. They would use their foreknowledge to their advantage in order to cherry-pick events which they wanted to prevent or alter. Logically, it was sound, and Harry conceded it to himself and Hermione. At the same time, he hated it. He chafed at the restriction. The past 2 nights, he'd almost killed Wormtail. So many times he'd lost count. His instincts screamed at him to act. On the one hand, he wanted to rend and maim his family's betrayer. On the other, he wanted to secret the rat away in order to demonstrate serious innocence. At a cost to his own temper and sleep, he'd held back from giving in to his desires. Now that things were going to hell, he was going to secure the rat. If Peter was jostled a bit on the way back to Remus' quarters, well, he didn't think any of his family would care too much. Sirius might be pissed that he didn't get a shot, though. The thought of Sirius almost caused a giggle of happy anticipation to bubble up his throat. Sirius was alive. Remus and Minerva, too. Should we bring Phileas in on the secret? He wondered as he thundered up the steps to the boys' dormitory. Pushing the thought to the side, he slowly opened the door. He'd already silenced his feet, so he approached Ron's bed without making a sound. Settling himself, he wordlessly performed the summoning charm. With a rustle of sheets and curtains, a large gray rat flew out of Ron's bed. Hastily casting the stunning charm, he knocked out Wormtail in mid-flight. Easily catching the quiescent rat in his left hand, Harry let out a shaky breath. His usual trick was to summon a Death Eater, and while the slave of Voldemort was off balance, hit him with a vanishing spell. The brain was the usual target of the spell. Harry liked it because it was a very effective and bloodless way to put a Death Eater down. Most people didn't know how to counter it, either. Out of pure habit, he almost cast that at Wormtail. Luckily, the boy who lived remembered at the last minute to focus on stunning the rat and not gleefully removing his brain from his fuzzy little skull. He stuffed the rat into his pocket while turning to hustle back to Remus' quarters. Huffing a bit, "I need to start running again. This body's not in shape." He stopped suddenly. Neville was in the doorway, a dressing gown about him, his hair wet and a confused expression on his face. "Harry, what are you on about with Ron's rat?" the long-bottom scion asked in a low tone. "Fuck," Harry raged internally. "Look, Neville, it's a very long story that I don't have time to tell right now. Just know that things aren't as they seem." Neville evaluated Harry with a long, contemplative expression. Finally, he nodded. "All right then, I'll hold you to explaining this later." Silently, he moved to his wardrobe to pull out his clothes for the day. Nodding at his friend, for Neville was most definitely his friend, Harry hurried out of the dorm as if the devil himself were on his heels. Oh. Harry scooted through the door that led to Remus' quarters. Turning, he bolted down the passageway that led to the large receiving room that each professor had attached to their quarters. Feeling the lumpy weight of Wormtail in his pocket, Harry pushed thoughts of the betrayer aside. Hopefully, Sirius was in the room 5 feet in front of him. He was excited, but not nearly as excited as he had been when he first arrived in the past. This wasn't his Hermione, but it was close. Opening the door, his mind registered that Minerva and Hermione were already present and seated. He somehow recognized that Remus had stood, but his consciousness was completely consumed by the ragged wizard sitting in a wingback chair by the fire. "Sirius." A ragged smile broke upon his face, which was matched by a Padfoot special, a devious grin with a hint of charm. Slowly, Sirius rose to approach his godson. Throwing caution to the wind, Harry ran to Sirius, embracing him a hug. They were quiet, just holding each other, reassuring each other that they were really there, that they were all alive. "It's good to see you, Padfoot." "It's good to see you too, Pronglet." They both surreptitiously sniffled back tears, which fooled no one, before taking their seats. "Hermione gave us the gist of everything while you were gone," Sirius rasped. Harry nodded. "Good. I've got him here." He patted his bulging pocket. Reacting to Remus and Sirius' rabbit expressions, he held his palm up. "If I can keep from killing him, so too can you." Remus' expression fell before he nodded. Sirius looked away while nodding and grumbling under his breath. "So, where do we go from here?" Remus asked. "Well," Hermione began, "we're afraid of changing the timeline too much. If we turn Peter in, we lose a chance at Voldemort when he's weakest." Minerva, Remus, and Sirius were still. Finally, Remus asked, "Do you know where he is now?" "Somewhere in the forests of Albania." Remus hummed as he leaned back in his chair while scratching his chin. "So, why didn't you want to change the timeline too much?" Sirius asked in his disused voice. "The way I understand it, Voldemort wins if we stay on this path. Hermione wagged her head in SOS motion. True, but our plan is to hit him when he's most vulnerable. In the graveyard in early summer the year after next. Sirius' brow crinkled while Minerva pursed her lips. Remus took a deep breath before taking the plunge. I understand what you're saying, but wouldn't we be better served taking the offensive than playing a defensive strategy? Dumbledore's always advocated and pursued defense over offense, and we'll lose the war following Dumbledore's lead, correct? True, Hermione admitted. Harry was becoming more and more agitated as the three adults questioned the weight and C plan they'd been pursuing. Fear rose up in him like a snake. It coiled about his heart, constricting and squeezing. His breathing was little more than shallow pants as he escalated into a full-scale panic attack. Before Hermione could go on, Harry bolted to his feet like a scalded cat. Sharp breaths rushed in and out of his nose, sounding like a miniature freight train. Alarmed, Hermione tentatively reached out to her husband, Harry. He shook his head in jerky motions while he continued to pace. The others had gone quiet, as the youngest of the group walked back and forth like a pendulum. Finally, Sirius croaked, Pronglet, sit down. We need to discuss this. He was cut off by a sharp jabbing motion of Harry's hand. The boy who lived turned on his godfather, a terrified expression on his face, tears pooling in his eyes. Don't you get it? He nearly shouted. You all died. Wheeling on Sirius, he spat. You were fucking around with Bellatrix, and she killed you with a fucking banishing charm. All because you weren't paying attention and not taking her seriously. God damn you, Sirius. Wheeling on Remus, he cried. McNair cut you into pieces, Remus. He hacked you up like a cow and fed you to Greyback's pack. Only after they raped Tonks to death in front of you, of course. Who knows what happened to little Teddy? Turning to Minerva with despair etched across his features, he told her, You didn't look both ways before crossing the street. Something taught to toddlers, so a lorry with bad brakes killed you. Finishing his circuit, he turned to Hermione. Mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, he couldn't speak. Dropping to his knees, he sobbed, You died. You left me. The tears came in earnest now. Sobs racked his frame as the grief of so many years and so many deaths enveloped and consumed him. All of them were frozen in place with Harry's outburst. Hermione regained her composure, first before flying to her husband's side. I'm here, Harry. I'm here, baby. I'm here. She cooed to him as she rocked her man in her arms. Harry blubbered and cried. The tsunami of feelings wouldn't be restrained. Wiping his face with shaking hands, Remus moved to speak, but Harry beat him to it. I can't lose you all again, Harry whispered. I can't. Oh. In the end, they tabled the discussion. Remus brewed a very powerful sleeping potion, which he forced down Peter's throat with a dropper. Minerva did the duty for confinement by conjuring a steel box with no seams, Peter trapped within. Remus headed for Hogsmeade to purchase some healing and restorative potions for Sirius, and a replacement rat for Ron. Harry had shoved a bag full of gold in Mooney's hand and waved off his nascent protests. Go, he commanded. Minerva scared before giving Sirius a quick haircut and charming off his scraggly beard. As Sirius rubbed his now smooth chin, Harry joked, Padfoot, you'd best use Mooney's shower. With an exaggerated sniff at his armpit, Sirius drawled, I'm fine. Shower. Now, Minerva commanded in her best teacher's voice. Smiling with real affection, he bowed at the neck before replying, Yes, Professor McGonagall. Her face softened as she gave him a playful shove. Scamp. Go, you stink. When Sirius had disappeared into the bathroom, Minerva slowly turned to Harry before she asked, Are you well now? His face still a bit blotchy, Harry gave a one-shouldered shrug. I'll be okay. Minerva stared hard at him. His eyes mirrored Sirius for a quick moment, empty and hollow. Hermione wrapped her arm around him before giving Minerva a reassuring nod. She'd take care of her man. Oh. Is it only lunch? Harry asked. Hermione gave a cynical snort. Feels like it should be supper or even breakfast for tomorrow. I'm beat. Under his breath, Harry told her, Neville saw me take scabbers. He wants an explanation. Face crumpling with frustration, Hermione groaned. This is the last thing we need now. That was my thought. He glanced at her sidelong. Memory charm? She flinched at the thought. I don't like it. He sighed. Neither do I. Taking a bite of his sandwich, he pondered. Do we tell him? Do we ask him to trust us? His thinking aloud was derailed when Hermione joined in. Maybe we give him a part of the truth. Tell him about Moony and the Marauders. Remus pulled us aside after the last defense lesson to tell you that he knew your dad was best friends with him, in fact. We stopped by his quarters today to listen to him reminisce. We'll say that we recognize the rat from Moony's stories about your dad, so. He leaned in, planting a very thorough kiss on his wife. I knew there was a reason I married you, he added playfully. Admit it, I'm smart, she teased. You're the best, babe. His tone was playful, but the emotion behind the statement was serious. The haunted look from earlier still lingered in his eyes. Recognizing his sentiment, she gave him a sad smile while squeezing his hand. I love you, she told him in an undertone. And I you, with all my heart. Oh. It had been a long day. They checked back on Sirius in Moony's quarters, only to find him dead asleep while 7 different healing potions worked on him. He'll be out for a few days. Picking up pneumonia was the least of his worries. Staph infections, 2 broken fingers, a stress fracture in his leg, and to top it off, he has the flu. Shaking his head, Remus told them, we can all catch up more in a few days. He'll be fine here. What about Dumbledore? Hermione asked. His eyes narrowing, Remus replied, Minerva is taking care of that. She's responsible for guests who visit the professors, so she's back dating the visitor log and snowing Dumbledore. Snowing Dumbledore? Harry commented. Is that possible? Sure, she can. Apparently, she slips her pet projects past him on Wednesday nights. That's when he deals with Wisengamot or ICW paperwork. What's today? Wednesday, Harry answered with a smile. Excellent. Remus replied with a mischievous smile. 5 points to Gryffindor, Mr. Potter. Finally, they made it back to the tower after a boring charms class. Sitting side by side in the window seat gave them a sliver of privacy amidst the hustle and bustle of the common room. Harry, Hermione, can we talk? The Potters turned to see Neville fidgeting behind them. Hey, mate, Harry called, waving him to a seat next to them. Harry turned his body to face their friend. Discreetly, Hermione drew her wand to cast a privacy ward. Visibly nervous, Neville fidgeted as he sat. Neville, about earlier, Harry began. Professor Lupin was best friends with my dad and mom when they were in students here. That's why he asked us to stay behind after class the other day. He wanted to introduce himself on a more personal basis. Hermione chimed in. We stopped by after breakfast this morning, and he was telling stories. Apparently, they were all animagi in school. One of their friends was Peter Pettigrew. Neville frowned. I've heard that name. Yeah, he was supposed to be a hero for cornering Sirius Black, but Black killed him. Harry's eyes narrowed in genuine malice. Pettigrew was a rat animagus. Neville's eyes widened as his mind made the connection. Scabbers. Harry nodded. Yeah. We took him to Professor Lupin, who recognized him immediately. He did a spell which forced him back to his human shape. Sure enough, Peter Pettigrew. Wow, Neville breathed. Yeah. Hey, Nev, you can't tell anyone. This is a really big deal legally and all. We already got a rat to replace Pettigrew. Ron shouldn't know the difference. Harry had a decidedly earnest expression on his face. Sure. No problem. I won't say anything. His chubby face screwed up in determination. You can count on me, Harry. His heart falling into his feet, Harry forced a smile on his face. Thanks, Nevada. Thanks a lot. Oh. I'm such a dick. Hermione snuggled closer into Harry's side. They were snuggled in his bed, sticking charms holding the curtains closed, imperturbable charm keeping all sound in. They had a private bubble for themselves.